She was a devoted teacher, a wife, a mom of 3. But a single night out changed everything. 30-year-old Holly Hill went to a local Oklahoma restaurant for what should have been a simple Valentine's Day date night. And from the very first sip of a second margarita, her life was turned upside down. What her family calls a horrific accident would spiral into years of pain, dozens of medical procedures, and ultimately her death. Now investigators are calling her passing suspicious. The restaurant at the center of it, silent. And a small Oklahoma town is left grappling with a tragedy that should never have happened. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we start this episode of On the Case, let's talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered more than $25 billion for their more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim on your phone. So if you've been injured, start a claim at www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. What should have been a normal date night for a beloved Oklahoma teacher in a small town turned into a nightmare. And all of it, according to her family, started with one drink. 38-year-old Holly Hill, an elementary school teacher in Elgin, known for her kindness and dedication, spent more than 2 years battling the aftermath of a Valentine's Day dinner that her family says went horribly wrong. That night, a margarita she ordered at a local restaurant allegedly was not made with mix. It was made with industrial cleaning chemicals. Now investigators are calling her death suspicious, and the restaurant at the center of it, they are staying silent. So all of this started on Valentine's Day 2023 in the small town of Elgin, Oklahoma. It is southwest of Oklahoma City. Holly Hill, a beloved elementary school teacher, a wife, a mom of 3, she went out for what should have been a simple date night. Dinner, drinks, rare evening away from her busy classroom and her kids. Holly and her husband chose Hacienda Las Margaritas Bar and Grill. It's a spot the locals know well. She ordered a second margarita. And from that first sip, everything changed. Her mom, Kelly Hunter, later told News 9, quote, her mouth was on fire and she knew something wasn't right. Holly bolted to the bathroom. She started vomiting, rinsing her mouth with water, desperate to wash out the burning. That second drink, her family says, was not made with margarita mix. It was made with industrial grade degreaser, a chemical cleaning solution that should have never been anywhere near a bar. Within days, doctors discovered Holly had suffered severe chemical burns, especially down her esophagus. The damage was catastrophic. Over the next several weeks, Holly made trip after trip to the emergency room, and that became her new normal. And for the next 2.5 years, she endured more than 60 medical procedures. Even after word of the incident spread through the small town, the restaurant did not address the incident until May of 2023, when it issued a public apology on Facebook, writing, quote, please accept our apologies for our delay in addressing the situation we encountered a few months ago. We are very sorry for what happened. We have never walked away from responsibility and will continue to support them in any way possible while our insurance company is on the case. We again want to apologize to her, her family, and the Elgin community. Our prayers continue for her and her family. Despite Holly's struggles, she never gave up her classroom. She kept teaching at Elgin Public Schools, where she had once been a student herself. But all of that came to an end on Wednesday, October 23rd. Holly passed away, leaving a hole in the hearts of her family, her friends, and her students. Elgin Public Schools Superintendent Nate Mraz wrote on Facebook, quote, this morning I received the unimaginable call that Holly had passed away unexpectedly. Holly was a dedicated teacher, Elgin alumni, and a beloved mother and wife. She was an owl through and through, and we lift her family up in prayer tonight. Then, the very next day, the Elgin Police Department dropped a major update, revealing the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation is now leading the inquiry into Holly Hill's death, signaling just how seriously authorities are now taking this case. In a Facebook post, Chief Parsons wrote, quote, "The Elgin Police Department has been in daily contact with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and has received guidance from the district attorney. The OSBI will initiate an initial inquiry into this matter and will be assisted by the Elgin Police Department. The OSBI will be the lead agency in this matter. Holly's family has been notified, and we ask the community to be patient and respectful to the family. If you feel you have any pertinent information, feel free to contact us at 580-492-5777 or private message us with your contact information. No further information can be released at this time." Friends and the community quickly began reacting online. One local resident posted that same day, quote, "See previous post as to what happened to this poor woman. She was served a margarita with industrial-grade degreaser in it at Las Margaritas in Elgin, Oklahoma. I'm hearing this is the same owners as Las Fiestas in Chickasha." In the previous post that the user was referring to was written on October 23rd by Holly's best friend, Melissa Fullerton Lovett. She shared a gut punch of a post writing of the heartbreak her family is enduring. Quote, "Holly Hill, you deserved so much more than this. Thanks to Las Margaritas in Elgin, my best friend and her husband will have to bury their one and only Holly. Holly endured severe chemical burns in her mouth and esophagus. She underwent 60+ procedures in this small amount of time since. Holly missed out on being the young wife and mom she deserved to be. Now, her family and friends will carry on the memory of Holly and never let her story fade away until justice is served." Even as friends and family shared their heartbreak online, Holly's loved ones had already been pursuing accountability behind the scenes. It turns out in 2023, not long after the Valentine's Day incident, Holly filed a civil lawsuit against Hacienda Las Margaritas Bar and Grill. A spokesperson for the personal injury attorney who represented Holly later confirmed to News 9 the case reached a confidential settlement earlier this year. Her mom, Kelly Hunter, made it clear that the fight for accountability didn't end with the settlement, telling the outlet, quote, "The number one thing that we really want at this point and out of this is we want people to be aware of what happened at that restaurant and to quit supporting them. We want them to be held accountable for taking my daughter's life because they did. It might have been a long fight, but ultimately they're the cause." Now, as for this restaurant, Las Margaritas Bar and Grill, they have remained largely silent since Holly's passing. Their only public acknowledgement of this incident came from that May 2023 Facebook post. According to Holly's obituary, she wasn't just a teacher, she was a devoted mom, a loving wife, and a bright light in her community. As her family put it, quote, "Holly had a gift for making every child feel special, capable, and loved. Her perseverance and love were nothing short of remarkable. Holly's love and light will continue to guide us every day." Holly's life was full of accomplishments and love. She was born and raised in Elgin, Oklahoma. She was proud to be an Elgin Owl, and she spent her school years active in softball and basketball, always thriving as part of a team. She went on to attend the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma in Chickasha, earning double majors in early childhood education and deaf education. Holly's passion for teaching eventually carried her back to her alma mater, where she taught 3rd grade. Her life is remembered not only by her students and colleagues, but by her family and friends who will cherish her memory forever. A GoFundMe shared by a close friend captured the heartbreak of her passing. After 2.5 years of battling complications from ingesting industrial cleaner that had been served to her in a margarita at a local restaurant, she succumbed to her injuries. She leaves behind her husband of 7 years, 3 children, her family, and countless friends. Joining us now to talk about this case is homicide investigator Chris McDonough. Thank you for being with us on Law and Crime. Very sad case here as this teacher Just had such a tough medical battle after all this happened. What does it say to you when law enforcement uses the term, like in this case, of suspicious?
There's a couple of things that jump right out, Chris. First of all, whenever law enforcement uses that word, that means they've actually done some groundwork behind the scenes, and they're trying to connect whether or not the intent of the individual who may have served that drink had been, involved in some type of activity that would lean them towards a criminal act. So, mhm.
Well, I was going to say, when someone uses suspicious, because that was my question, where if, let's just say, a bartender grabbed something that shouldn't have been there and it was a mistake, but still they give it to her. So in some ways it would maybe a manslaughter type situation as opposed to murder. Like, does suspicious mean that there was this intent? We're going to give her this margarita and we're going to take this woman's life.
Yeah, and also there could be some administrative challenges behind the scenes, right, for that to connect that intent and the word suspicion, i.e., are there any alcohol beverage control laws that were broken? And if so, are they in compliance, the restaurant and the server, are they in compliance with those laws? Because in Oklahoma, like any other state, when you're serving alcohol, that changes the game. It's not just about food at this point, and it raises the stakes, and there are requirements in order to do that. So that could be suspicious in of itself.
As a homicide investigator, and you look at what we know at this point about what she consumed, and this wasn't her having a peanut allergy and accidentally someone put peanuts in her dish. I mean, this is stuff that should not be near a bar. This is industrial grade degreaser, and you could just, the description of the impact on her body was instant. What stands out to you that is what was in the margarita, according to her family?
Great question. I mean, obviously, the very first thing that stands out is how did that product get into the bar setting? Who put it there? Why is it there? How long has it been there? Who knew about it? So those types of questions need to be answered. And if there are connecting, answers to those questions, then obviously you want to start interviewing people. And once you start narrowing that scope down, then you want to narrow it into, okay, well, who knew that this item was here? And did that bartender know long before that drink was ever served and that product could have been available?
Holly Hill consumed this margarita. It was Valentine's Day 2023, which is just so incredibly sad. I mean, the whole story is just so tragic. But it's been a couple of years since this happened, and now you hear that it's suspicious. What are some of the challenges that law enforcement might be dealing with now as they're still trying to figure out what happened?
The fact that health issue lasted for so long, that basically put the investigation into a holding pattern. But that also triggered what in Oklahoma for ABC, alcohol beverage control. But in Oklahoma, it's I believe it's the Oklahoma Beverage Law Enforcement Commission. That triggered administrative violations. And that's where we saw the civil issues start to take place. However, the criminal issues had not occurred yet. And so that clock starts, unfortunately, upon the death of our victim here. And so they had to wait. They were in a holding pattern, but they were able to, I'm assuming, conduct a tremendous amount of investigation during those 2 years.
If a civil case and there's been investigation going on that end, because I imagine every bar, or at least a lot of them, have a surveillance camera showing the bartender working. I don't know if that exists in this case, but if there's been a civil investigation ongoing, do the criminal investigators have access to all of those pieces of material if they're trying to build a case on their end?
Yeah, absolutely. At some point, they could actually subpoena the county attorney or the investigators could subpoena that civil action and all of that paperwork to connect to their criminal investigation.
I understand a lot of times with businesses, the way they respond can be on the advice of a lawyer, how they respond to something like this. But then at the same time, the public wants answers. Certainly there's a level of trust if you hear that someone consumed had Holly Hill's issues from having a margarita at this restaurant. If you're a criminal investigator on this case, the fact that it took them a couple months to publicly apologize, and then they really haven't said much since, what red flags might those raise for the criminal investigators trying to figure out what exactly happened?
So that would kind of indicate consciousness of guilt, right? That there's something behind the scenes that the restaurant and or the employee who served the beverage did not want the public to know right away. I mean, typically in an accident situation, immediately, accountability is accepted. But if there is other type of, hidden type of activity, then you kind of get this, dodgeball kind of problem where you're constantly trying to break through and to get to the truth. So if the restaurant is shown that that's what's taking place, the investigators are going to be patient, and they're just going to keep chipping away until eventually they get to what that truth is. And that's the intent part of this whole thing.
And you think of the truth because, I think about what I did last week and I probably can't remember a lot of it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who were at that restaurant back on Valentine's Day 2023. And there might even be people who remember her being there and maybe they saw her having a margarita. They could remember that, but then there's other details that just fade away with time. How difficult is the challenge now for law enforcement to try to get people who could say they witnessed something or remember specific details, or even finding the people who were at that restaurant that night so many years later?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris, and it does become somewhat of a task, right? And that's why what you want to do is start leaning towards the tangible type of provable evidence, i.e., the licensing challenges. Remember, every bartender in the state of Oklahoma, like any other state, they have to go through a licensing process. And that means they have to know what the language is. They have to understand, what they're doing. Because when you put that alcohol beverage up on a bar, and by the way, I was a vice detective from 1984 to 86. So we used to do this all the time before I was in homicide. You would go into the bar, you check the alcohol beverages in the back of the bar. In fact, you would even pick up the bottles of alcohol and you turn it upside down. And sometimes there's even gnats or bugs inside of the alcohol because it's been sitting so long and it hadn't been sold. Okay. So these we used to call them bar checks. Well, each of those employees behind that bar, you would interview them and you would ask them, how long has this alcohol been here? Have you known about this alcohol? And have you ever tried to serve this alcohol with the intent to knowing that those bugs are in there? So those are the kind of things I think that are taking place behind the scenes. And so that puts the other witnesses that you're talking about kind of on a periphery, and it focuses back on that bartender. What does that bartender know? And how did they not know that this was, some type of acid or some type of cleaner?
And because the other thing I think too is, so quickly at any bar, you're done with the drink, they take your glass, put it in the deep cleaning, hot water. And I'm not sure what type of evidence they have in this case, but I can't imagine they still have the glass and they still have some of, what even glass that it was. She obviously had this issue. She ran to the bathroom, but I don't know if the staff then took it and washed it. If you don't have that kind of evidence, and even you might have a bartender who doesn't want to talk, and there's kind of just some people who might verbally give you some information. How can you try to build a case if you don't have kind of that scientific piece of evidence like the glass that has the acid degreaser in it that she drank?
Then you shift back towards, how did this product get into the bar serving area? Who put this product in the bar serving area? When did that occur? And you want to kind of narrow that timeline down, Chris, because as you know more than anybody, when we have an expectation of when you go into a restaurant that they've done their homework and the products they're going to serve us are not going to take our life 2 years later. So you want to narrow that timeline down.
The other thing I think about too is if you were making a drink, typically if you have whatever bottle, a bottle of, tequila or something like that comes in a tequila bottle, I can't imagine industrial grade degreaser comes in a container that looks like something that would be appetizing for a drink. It's either in like a big container, or if it's in a smaller one, I mean, I'm just speculating that it'd be off of an oil can. How do you go into looking at the investigation and even thinking of something like that, of like, okay, maybe they use it for their ovens in the back to try to degrease things, but then, because there has to be that moment, it goes from the back to the front. How do you figure that out?
Yeah, so that is a great question as well. And so it's really all about talking to people at that point, right? You really have to narrow down your investigative and interviewing skills to where you really want to talk to the people behind the bar all the time. Maybe there was a shift before that, before this individual, pick that cleaner up and put it into a drink. Also, you want to make sure that somebody else hadn't put that product into another container that made it look like it was kind of a bar product, right? So you want to push those narratives out rather quickly. But if it is sitting there and it's obvious that it's a aesthetic type of cleaner, then now we get down into the nitty gritty. Okay, who knew it was here? How long has it been here? Like we talked about a little bit earlier, and who had access to it and why? Why is it behind the bar? You want to really narrow that down.
And then I just think of her family and certainly what they've been going through, but it seems like they've documented a lot over the last couple of years. How does that help? I know on the civil side, that's huge, just documenting all the health struggles that she had up until her death. How could that information be used on the criminal side in building an eventual case?
Well, if that information, if there have been some, depositions, if there's been information that maybe the bartender didn't talk about with the law enforcement authorities, but they talked about it through a deposition in the civil, attorneys, then that could be gold. Because now you're able to take that information and potentially, sit down with that individual again in an interview room and say, you know what, before you say anything, let me remind you of what you already said in the civil deposition and press play. I mean, you'd be surprised what people will do when they see themselves, looking back at them. And then they realize, oh, this is a different game. This isn't civil anymore. We're talking about, potentially going to prison for quite some time.
Yeah, and it'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. And I just think for you, as your experience as a homicide investigator, but also having worked in the vice investigations as well. I mean, have you ever seen a case like this before?
I've not. I've not seen a case where, a cleaning fluid got mixed up and put into a drink. I've had poison cases, but nothing like this.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next. Very sad that this woman, she was a teacher, she was a mom, a wife, she loses her life. And now it's being deemed suspicious. We'll see how it plays out. Chris McDonough, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.